Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. So you just finished watching Heated Rivalry and you're going through withdrawals. You're thinking to yourself, how am I supposed to continue on until season 2 comes out? How am I supposed to move on with my life? And I'm here to help you. I'm here to give you the antidote to your problems. I'm here to keep you going till season 2 comes out. What you're going through is completely normal. It's okay to finish watching a show or finish reading a book and think to yourself, what's next? When will anything ever feel this good? That's why I'm here, to give you recommendations. Help me help you, but also help me by watching this video. Am I saying that if you read these books, you will be completely healed? I don't know, I'm not a doctor. But at the very least, you will be temporarily sated, which is miles better than the feelings of despair that you're currently experiencing. So if that sounds like your thing, stay tuned. I'm not particularly sure who this video will reach. It might reach people who had read Heated Rivalry and the entire Game Changer series prior to watching the show, which is the camp that I fall in. It might reach the people who have watched the show and have now gone on to read the books. It might reach the people who have watched the show but haven't read the books, and that is where I'm going to start. If you have watched Heated Rivalry and you loved it, I would highly advise you to read the books. In fact, not just Heated Rivalry, the book, but the entire Game Changer series. 1, because I think it's a decent series altogether. 2, because Heated Rivalry is fantastic, and The Long Game, which is the sequel to Heated Rivalry, is even better. 3, you'll get an entire picture of Ilya, Shane, and their entire hockey world, which I think makes watching the show even richer and gives you additional context and background that you may be missing. So, the first series I want to recommend to you is the Game Changer series by Reid. It is the series that contains both Heated Rivalry and The Long Game. Book 1 in the Game Changer series is called Game Changer, which follows Scott and Kip. If you have watched the show, then you know who Scott and Kip are, and you're probably familiar with their background. But this book goes into depth because I believe they only got 1 episode in the show, whereas this is an entire book about their story that has added complexity and background and context. So in this book, Kip is working at a smoothie shop, and one day, whilst he's on his boring shift, a very handsome man comes in, orders a smoothie, they get talking, both of them acknowledge that there's mutual attraction between them, but he doesn't actually instantly recognize Scott as a famous hockey player. Because Scott is obviously attracted to him and enjoyed speaking to him, he keeps on coming back. And eventually, Kip discovers that this is actually a famous hockey player, and not only is he famous, but he's actually secretly gay. They decide to have like a quiet sort of relationship. Kip is working temporarily at the smoothie shop whilst also trying to get into graduate school. Scott, who has up until this point led a very private life and has been quite content being successful, is getting really tired of living what feels like a double life, where he can't have a relationship because he is afraid of the possible backlash he could get for being gay, and he's also afraid of what it can do to his career because Scott actually has no family. He doesn't have siblings, and to him he feels like hockey is the only thing he has. And so if he lets this cat out of the bag and it ruins his career, he's lost everything that he's ever worked for his whole life. And he's perfectly fine with how his life is, but then Kip comes into it and he starts thinking about how his straight counterparts are able to get married. They don't have to hide their relationships. They can have their loved ones cheer them from the crowds, and it's not a big deal. And he's feeling the weight of the unfairness that is the homophobic world that he lives in. So this book follows them navigating a secret relationship, ultimately being dissatisfied with what they have, obviously, and trying to rectify that. I will also say that Scott is trying to win the Stanley Cup because, if I'm not mistaken, I've not read the book in a very long time, but I remember him playing for the New York team and wanting to bring the Stanley Cup home because it's something that they hadn't won in years. And he is the captain of the New York team. So on top of just being a regular hockey player, it's up to him to, I suppose, motivate his team enough to win this big thing. So this book follows them as they navigate all that. It wasn't my favorite in the series, but I think it's a solid start and it gives you an overall picture of their relationship, and I highly recommend reading the book first and then moving through the rest of the series. The second book of the series is probably the most famous. It's the one that you've probably heard of, and it's called Heated Rivalry. And this follows Ilya and Shane. Ilya and Shane meet very young. I believe they meet as teenagers, 19, in Canada when they're playing hockey together, and they start a secret affair that goes on to last a decade. So this book follows them as they meet every now and again to sleep together. It's very secret. Neither of them are out of the closet. They are actually rivals on the ice. They're two of the best hockey players, so everybody knows them as competitors and sees their antics. They have to hide the relationship, one, because again, like Scott, they don't want it to affect their careers, with the additional layer of the fact that Ilya is from Russia and being gay is something that is not accepted in Russia. And in order for him to be able to continue going back home to see his father and his brother, he has to keep it under wraps. Shane is probably one of the most ambitious characters I've ever read about. He lives and breathes hockey in a way that I don't think anybody else in this series does. He's very serious about his career. He has like hockey fanatic parents as well. So the whole thing runs within the family, and he's their only child. And not only is it his dream to be a hockey player, but it's also their dream for him, if that makes any sense. So there's so much riding on their ability to keep their personal business private, because the world is not a fair world. They didn't have a full-blown relationship. Whenever they did have the chance to meet, they would just sleep together. And eventually that affair turns romantic when they catch feelings for one another. And I really love this one. It is just such a sweet book. It's very angsty, very smutty as well, if that's what you're looking for. I think it works well, balancing the tender and soft feelings with added stress about what it is to be who they are in the world that they live. If anything, the only thing I didn't love is I wish we tapped more into Shane's identity as a Canadian man who is of Japanese descent on his mother's side. That would have been more interesting to see. Other than that, I thoroughly enjoyed it. And the book to TV show adaptation is pretty much flawless, I have to say. As somebody who read the book before watching the show, I thought it was fabulously done. The next book in the series is called Tough Guy, and it follows Ryan and Fabian. I can't remember what team Ryan played for, but what I do know is that he's an enforcer. And he is traded all the time. So he goes to a new team, and before he has time to settle down and get to know people and become comfortable, he's traded again. Because he's so big, I believe he's 6'7", they immediately put him in the enforcer role. But he is struggling with this role because it requires him to basically beat people up every time he plays. And he doesn't really enjoy it. He's a very sweet, gentle, soft person. And it's very hard for people to look at him and see him as that. And it's a part of his identity that he struggles with. He's also struggling with being secretly gay, feeling isolated because he has social anxiety and he's massively introverted, and all those things are working against him, constantly moving, struggling with being social, being introverted, having anxiety, being traded all the time before he can get used to a place, and then also keeping this massive secret that isolates him from the rest of his team. He moves to Montreal and he meets Fabian. With Fabian, they actually had a previous history because Fabian's family used to host hockey players at their home. Players move from place to place, and sometimes you have these host families that will occasionally give shelter to younger hockey kids who are living far away from home. At some point in his childhood, Ryan actually lived with Fabian's family and they had secret crushes on each other, but it was never fully realized and they didn't really admit it to one another. So now that they're in the same city again, they have an opportunity to rekindle it, and that's what they're trying to do in this story. There are so many reasons to love this one. I loved Fabian because he was a man who knew himself. He was very proud about who he was. He was a musician. He went against social norms in the sense that he would wear clothes that were typically meant for women. He wore makeup. He wore different colors. That's part of what draws Ryan to him, because Ryan likes people who aren't afraid to be themselves, even though there's this ever-present threat of what a homophobe or a group of homophobes could do to them and how they could make their lives miserable. And Fabian is the embodiment of acknowledging that homophobia exists, but living his life regardless and being confident in who he is. And that's something that very much attracts Ryan to him, because Ryan would love to be more confident and to be more proud of who he is. That is actually really central to the conflict in the book, mostly because when they start dating, when they start getting to know each other, it becomes apparent apparent that Ryan is scared about acknowledging that hockey is perhaps not for him and trying to make changes. I think sometimes Fabian was a little bit hard on him because I think it's unrealistic to meet somebody like Ryan and not expect there to be trouble with him potentially quitting something that he had been playing his whole life and coming out and all the changes that will have. But in the same vein, I think he also needed somebody like Fabian to encourage him and to push him to pursue what he loved, especially because it was actually affecting him and he was extremely miserable. There's a lot of nuance. Ryan is definitely one of my favorite characters from this entire series. He is the soft, gentle giant of dreams, and Fabian is so confident, so bold. There's so many stark contrasts between them, but I think ultimately they did work well, and I really enjoyed the story. Next book in the series is Common Goal, which follows Eric and Kyle. So if you've read Game Changer, then you know Kyle is actually a friend of Kip's, and he had an unrequited crush on Kip. So this book starts off with him still sort of resenting the relationship that has formed between Scott and Kip and trying to get over his feelings for Kip. He meets Eric, who is a player, I believe, in his late 30s. Eric actually plays with Scott for the New York team, and he is recently divorced from, I think, his childhood sweetheart. So he's learning how to do life on his own when his marriage suddenly doesn't work out, and he's also on the brink of retiring. He's also realizing that he may not be as straight as he thought he was. So those are like massive things going on in his life. Recently divorced, just started living alone, will be retiring soon, and then an identity crisis. Then he meets Kyle and they agree to have a friends with benefits situation where Kyle teaches him basically about his body's needs and wants. I think it was really interesting with this book because Eric being the older person, I really liked the fact that the roles were reversed, where it was Kyle that was teaching him. There's at least 10 years between them. Kyle is either in his mid to late 20s and Eric is in his late 30s. So there's a big age gap between them. And that was probably the central conflict in the story and the reason why I didn't like it as much. I just thought that they dwelled so much on the age difference, and I feel like if you're going to do a book in which there is a large age gap, I just think just go with it and be confident in it. It almost felt like Reid was very sort of almost apologetic about it, and then it took away from the story because while they were worrying about the age gap and spending time apart, that could have been time dedicated to developing their relationship. So by the time the story ended, I was so obviously quite bored and no longer invested in their story, which is quite sad because I felt like it had a lot of potential. It was okay, but it was nowhere near my favorite, I don't think. Even as somebody who is not typically a big fan of age gap relationships, I think there was definitely potential for something greater, and it just kind of fell through for me. The next book in the series is The Long Game, which is the sequel to Ilya and Shane's story. So it is them now having confessed to their feelings and in a relationship. This book starts off in the summer when they're basically off and they run a summer camp for children who play hockey. I love this book a lot more than I loved Heated Rivalry. And I loved Heated Rivalry, but The Long Game just feels more mature. It feels more seasoned. They feel like they're grown up now. And you can definitely see a marked difference from the Ilya and Shane in Heated Rivalry in this book. In this book, they're dealing with even more problems, having a secret relationship that they can't talk about, like the rest of their counterparts. Would love to be able to acknowledge each other in real life as partners, but they can't because they're trying to maintain their careers. They live in two different countries, and so they're operating a long distance relationship. So they only ever get to see each other every now and again when they happen to be playing in the same city, and then they're on the road a lot. So it takes a toll on their relationship. Ilya's father has recently passed away, and even though they had a complicated relationship, it doesn't mean that it affected him any less. There's a lot of talk about depression in this particular story. Shane is also very hyper fixated on his career. He has like this really crazy diet plan that he's not deviating from. He is hyper focused on training, on being the best. He takes his job extremely seriously, and the efforts that he's putting into hockey are obviously paying off. Recently, I think Reid has come out to say that Shane is actually on the autism spectrum. So I think when you read The Long Game, read it with that knowledge and don't be so hard on Shane, especially because Ilya hid a lot of what he was going through from Shane. And even though the signs were there, if somebody was extremely observant, I think it's quite understandable from Shane's perspective that he might have missed how much Ilya was struggling, especially because he also does tend to miss a lot of social cues. This book had so many cute moments. There's so much crying. It felt so real and raw, and gone was that angst from Heated Rivalry, and it's replaced with something I felt was much deeper and much more lovable. You get to see them interact with kids, you get to see them interact with Shane's parents. Even with all this heavy subject matter, they are still Ilya and Shane. They are still outrageously funny. They still piss each other off. They have so many passionate moments between them. There is one scene in particular, and OG fans will know, where something significant happens involving Ilya, and it is honestly the sweetest thing. Your heart will be broken into pieces and put back again. I'm not even joking. It is, oh my god, I don't even know how to explain it. I don't want to spoil it for you. I want you to go in with as little information as possible, especially regarding that scene. But it changes the course of their relationship, so much so that there's a big life decision that comes immediately after. Very happy. But then it also makes Shane question how much of his life he dedicates to hockey and why he isn't getting the same effort that he puts into the sport back in terms of his own personal life. It is honestly the most beautiful book. I know Heated Rivalry has probably a stronger fan base, but I think The Long Game is genuinely the GOAT of this series. It is one of my favorite books of all time, but I think it is undeniably the best book in this series, and you can come and fight me. I don't care. It is amazing. And Ilya, despite his struggles, I promise you, is still Ilya. He still has that personality. One thing I really loved about Ilya is you get to see how much not just Shane loves him, but a lot of his counterparts in the hockey community love him as well. Even throughout the series, he makes several cameos. I love how it's so obvious how personable he is across the entire Game Changers world. If you don't read any book in this series, read Heated Rivalry, but most importantly, please read The Long Game. If you're looking for something that will rip your heart to shreds and put it back together again with love and laughter and tears and passion, The Long Game is the one for you. And then the last book in this series is called Role Model, and that follows Troy and Harris. Harris actually is a social media manager for the team that Troy plays for, but I have to admit, even Harris's cuteness couldn't make me like this book. I just couldn't get over all the stuff that Troy had done across other stories. Unfortunately, I went into this story not liking him, and it definitely colored my view of the entire book. So I actually DNF'd it. It is the only book in this series that I haven't read all the way through because the story felt quite lackluster to me, but I really didn't like Troy, and that really colored my entire view of the story, so much so that I couldn't get into it. So I can't really tell you much about it because I don't really know, but definitely give it a try and see if you feel differently. Unrivaled is coming out very soon, and it is the continuation of Ilya and Shane's stories. I suspect we'll also see cameos from previous cast members as well, so that's something I'm very much looking forward to. I didn't know if Rachel Reid had completed the series, and I'm very excited, I'm not gonna lie. There's a part of me that is afraid that she could have just left Ilya and Shane's story at The Long Game, but there is also a part of me that wants more and more and more of them, so I'm very intrigued, and I'll definitely be back after it comes out and I've read it. In the same vein as the Game Changers series, this is a standalone book and it's called Time to Shine, also by Rachel Reid. I would highly suggest you read it. I had a lot of fun reading it. It follows Casey and Landon. Landon actually plays for the AHL, and he is called to Landon's team to substitute for a goaltender that has just recently had an injury. Because he's so good, they thought they would move him up to the big leagues. The thing with Landon is that he's recently lost his sister, and he hasn't dealt with the grief that comes with having lost somebody that was so significant and central to his life. So he moves to this other city, and despite being so excited, it's against the backdrop of being so sad. He's also struggling with his self-worth and experiencing imposter syndrome. Despite the fact that he's so skilled and he's so hardworking and he's so talented, he still doesn't really think that he deserves to be there. And then you have Casey, who is the life of the party. He's the heart and the soul of the team, but aside from that, he's an extreme people person. He's the kind of person in a group that will make sure that everybody's okay. He will make sure that they go out after a game. So when he meets Landon and he notices that Landon is a bit removed and reserved and a bit detached, he does all he can to bring him into the group, which also involves him asking Landon to move in with him as a roommate. Not only does Casey play for the NHL, but he also comes from a wealthy family. His father was a former hockey player, so he comes from a lot of money and he makes a lot of money. So he has this massive house. And then he tells Landon, you should probably just move into our house because I have all this space and nobody else lives there. Also, it would benefit him greatly because he really doesn't like to be alone. And so with his teammate living there, there's another person and he doesn't have to avoid home as much as he does. So it's a bit of a slow burn, but I think it's so worth it. I definitely like it a lot more than I like a few of the books in Game Changer. If I'm not mistaken, Landon was either on the asexual spectrum or demisexual. Either way, I loved that representation in the story. Casey comes from a lovely family, and I think Landon was able to reconnect with his family after they had been obviously shattered by the loss of his sister, and so both families came together. His dad is a massive hockey fan, so for his son to basically date the son of a hockey legend was kind of a big deal to them, and I just really enjoyed the story. It was emotional, it was packed full of depth, but it was still kind of light and very cute. If I was going to rank the Game Changer series, I would say my favorite is The Long Game. It is just the best written book in the series. There has been so much progression in Ilya and Shane's dynamic, and it was beautiful to see them tackle real challenges that a couple in their position might face. If you read The Long Game after watching this video, I am so jealous of you because it's one of those books that I wish I could read for the first time again. I would say my number 2 would be Heated Rivalry for obvious reasons that I've been through. It is beautiful. It is only, I think, a few steps down from The Long Game. It is the start of Ilya and Shane's whole relationship, so it holds a special place in my heart. I would say number 3 is Tough Guy, because I loved his and Fabian's story. It was very cute. I loved the topics discussed in the story, and most importantly, I loved Ryan. And the thing about me is, once I emotionally connect to a character, I can rank their books higher than if a book was better written and I didn't like the characters, because I'm a character-driven reader. I would say in 4th place, I'd probably put Game Changer, Scott and Kip's story. Really nice, really easy, really sweet. I liked it, but nothing as special as the other 3. Number 5, Come and Go, Eric and Kyle's story. It had a lot of potential. And then last place, I would put Role Model, because I couldn't even be asked to read it. So the next series on my list is the Offsides series by one of my favorite authors, J.J. Mulder. And this follows a group of friends as they each find their loves. So the first book is Changing the Game. It follows Sam and Troy. Troy plays for the South Carolina hockey team. Sam, who has come to work for the team, I think he works in the administrative part of the team, and comes in feeling very sad because he had dreams of being a hockey player, but after his dreams has suddenly been derailed, now he has to focus on, mourning that loss, but also trying to, continue with his life. He's also had a really nasty breakup with his ex-girlfriend, and the breakup happened as a result of this hockey dream that he had being taken away from him. So he begins his job and meets all the guys, and he's just really sad at first. Troy invites him to live with him just to get him settled. This is one of the few hockey stories in which he's actually openly gay. He doesn't really talk about it, but if he's asked about it, he'll say that he's gay. And he's always been extremely, proud of who he is, even though he doesn't come from the best background. Despite all that, he's such a happy, warm, giving person. I loved how their relationship blossomed. I think it's a solid debut into the rest of the series. You can definitely read it as a standalone, but I think it's nice to have that foundation, and then you head on to the rest of the series, which I think gets better as each book, goes along. Then the next book is Square to the Puck. This follows Corwin and Nigel. Corwin is the captain of this team. So on top of having his hockey responsibilities, he's also in charge of the overall welfare of the team. He's the kind of person where when people can't go home for holiday season, he'll invite them to his house, he'll cook for them. He has a very homemaker kind of persona. He loves making people feel comfortable, making people feel welcome. He loves to cook for people, and he cooks amazingly well, and everyone knows it. He has a bit of a history with Nigel in the sense that they met about 10 years ago, and it was a run-in, and it didn't go particularly well. And they hadn't seen each other since. And Nigel is actually traded to Corwin's team, and now they have to either pretend like that run-in didn't happen or work through it and try to be friendly after. I like the fact that they resolved the issues that happened 10 years ago very quickly. Nigel was very apologetic, because I wouldn't say it was technically his fault, but he wasn't the kindest person in that moment. And I loved to see how he was able to take accountability, and he was the main driver behind why they were able to resolve things so quickly and why they were able to work through their issues. It was beautiful to see him take the lead in that regard. Cohen comes from quite an abusive background. He has quite abusive parents. He also has an NHL background in the sense that his dad was a former hockey player. He has a lot of shame about being gay, and he's also in the closet. He's so far in the closet that even his best friends don't know that he's gay. And I think it's very sad because he loves and trusts them so much. And there is a part of him, this is falling down. And there is a part of him that knows that they don't judge him and they will accept him, but he's crippled by so much fear. And it's lovely when they confirm what he already knew, that they would love him regardless, and it didn't have to be a big issue, and he could be in the relationship of his dreams, because Cohen has been so crippled by fear and so crippled by the abuse that he suffered at the hands of his parents that he's never dated before. He's never acknowledged his gayness in a real way, and Nigel comes and gives him the opportunity to do so. It's such a beautiful book to just watch unfold, and it wasn't perfect, but it really tugged at my heartstrings. If something can capture me emotionally, I'm very likely to rate it higher, even if it's maybe lacking in other areas. And Nigel was the most patient man ever. It's funny because if you looked at the overall picture, there are so many things that Nigel did where you might think, why is he sacrificing so much? Why is he pushing so much? But the thing is, Cohen is such an integral part of the group, and he's such a mother hen, and he cares so much about the people around him. So it was nice to see somebody fuss over him the way he fusses over other people. And I think that was my favorite part of the book, just to see him get in return what he pours into other people, if that makes any sense. And then the third book in the series is Between the Pipes. This follows Anthony and Nico. So Nico is actually the coach for the local university or college. I believe he used to play professional hockey, but he got an injury which left him permanently disabled. So he is adjusting to life with this new disability, and he is hating it because he feels like everything is against him. Also, the reason why he got this injury is extremely sad, and it's extremely heartbreaking, and it's part of the reason why he hasn't ever disclosed that he's gay. Homophobia, when you look at the fact that there are people in this world that think that it's right to treat somebody the way that they do simply because they like somebody of the same gender, it baffles me and it makes me enraged. And if I feel this way, how do the people in the LGBTQ plus community feel? How enraged must they be on a daily basis to just have people spew so much hatred on them for things that they can't control, for crimes that they actually are not committing? It must be heartbreaking. I would say Nico is very understandably miserable and negative and unwilling to embrace life. And there comes Anthony, who is also in this friendship group with Cohen and Troy. He also plays for the team, and he is very bubbly and very full of joy and very helpful and very loving. I feel like friends are often a reflection of each other, and he's very kind and giving, much like Troy and Cohen. When you see each of their individual stories, you understand why they're such good friends, because they're such great people, and it's lovely that they formed this friendship and they found each other. Anthony actually thinks he's straight and has thought he was straight all this time, so he's only slept with women his whole life. Then he meets Nico and discovers, oh, I might actually be into men. If you like that whole caretaking trope, this is the perfect book for you. There is a lot of that in this book. There is also a lot of accepting love when you haven't previously experienced it, or coming out of feeling isolated, because Anthony spends a lot of time like trying to pull Nico out of being so distrustful of everybody around him, and it takes some time and it takes some patience, but I think it was perfectly paced. My only trouble with this book is it felt a little bit unrealistic in terms of them sleeping together. It's not really a big problem, but I wish it was more exploratory. I wish there were more questions, a bit more learning, rather than them feeling like two experts. I understand why Nico wouldn't feel like a novice, because he's been gay his whole life and he's only slept with men, but Anthony, having previously only slept with women, only to be like an expert in this book, felt a little bit unrealistic. But it was such a beautiful book that doesn't really take away from the story for me. And then the last book in this series is From Coast to Coast. It follows Remy and Grayson. So Grayson is actually really good friends with Troy from book one, but If I'm not mistaken, Troy was actually adopted by Grayson's family. I don't know if he was adopted by Grayson's family or they just kind of took care of him when he was younger. I can't remember the backstory. Anyways, what I do know is Grayson and Troy are very close. Obviously, we don't see a lot of them together because they live in different places. Grayson lives in Calgary in Canada. Troy lives in South Carolina. So there's a lot of distance between them. But they're very close and they love each other very much and their families are intertwined. And so Remy, who is originally from California, gets transferred to Calgary, fresh off his divorce from a woman. And so he's feeling a little bit out of his depth because now he's in a completely different country. He is in a completely different climate because the difference in climate between California and Calgary is a lot. It's a lot. And so he's dealing with that, and then he's also dealing with the fact that he actually may not be as straight as he initially thought. He might actually like men, which I imagine causes a bit of an identity crisis. So they start a friends with benefits relationship where he gets to explore that side of himself and really think about whether or not he would like to pursue a relationship with a man, and it works out perfectly. Their relationship is so sweet. I would say this book probably has the strongest writing in the series. You can actually see J.J. Mulder's progression from book 1 to book 4, and I think it was fun. It's just not my personal favorite, but I actually loved everything about it and I enjoyed it fully. I loved Remy. Remy's adopted and I loved his relationship with his mum, especially when Grayson goes over to meet her for the very first time. The homophobia on page was disheartening to read. It was heartbreaking, to be honest, because for the longest time before Remy came, Grayson happened to be in a particularly homophobic team. So not only is he struggling with being a gay man, kind of isolated from his family, he was also dealing with this team that secretly hated him, that wouldn't include him, that wouldn't even talk to him unless necessary, that insulted him all the time. He's a peacemaker and he's not somebody that would go out of his way to look for trouble. He just wants to play a game he loves and move on with his life. But unfortunately, you have these men that are making his life a living hell, and Remy literally came in as a ray of sunshine, no pun intended, with the blonde hair and the California background, but he did come as a ray of sunshine and just accepting Grayson for who he was and not making him feel less than it. And he would actually defend Grayson a lot, and he would actually give Grayson an opportunity to shine, because Grayson also was being targeted in the sense that he was being used very much as an assist player. Like, they wouldn't ever give him an opportunity to shine solely because they were homophobic. And it was behavior that started from the top and trickled down to the players, and it was just such a miserable experience for him. He actually did get traded to another team. So that was another aspect of the book, is them getting used to long distance, because even though they got into a relationship and built this really strong connection, when Grayson got an opportunity to go to another team, he couldn't possibly say no. Because even though Remy came about and made his life so much easier and happier and lighter, there was an opportunity to go to another team that would use him to the best of his abilities, that would not hurl insults at him all the time, and he just had to take it. So that was another part of the story, them dealing with long distance in the best way that they could, Remy dealing with all the PTSD from his divorce and really questioning whether or not he would like to be in another relationship, especially so quickly, especially with a man. There were so many complicated layers and it was really good. I'm gonna rank my favorites to my least favorite. I think that my favorite, this is actually interchangeable, because sometimes I feel like book 3 is my favorite, but sometimes I feel like book 2. Well, based on my current feelings, I would say number 1 is Square to the Puck, Cohen and Nigel's story, because I just love the two of them, and despite the flaws, it's a book that I have read time and time again. And like I said, if characters find a way to bury themselves in my heart, it definitely skews the way that I review a book, because I am a character driven reader. And then I would say Between the Pipes comes in very closely at number 2 as Anthony and Nico's story. Sometimes, like I said, Between the Pipes is number 1 and Square to the Puck is number 2, but they are my top 2 solid choices. I just love that caretaking aspect, and Anthony's such a ray of sunshine, and it was so good to see Nico get what he deserved and just get out of his angry cycle. And then I think following that is From Coast to Coast, Remy and Grayson's story. That's number 3. And then I would put number 4 as Changing the Game. Changing the Game was nice. It was a solid debut, but I think the other books are better than book 1, which is a good thing. You can see the improvements, which I think is fab. The next series that I would recommend is the SCU Hockey series, also by J.J. Mulder. And this actually follows several hockey players on the team that Nico coaches at South Carolina University. The first book is called Shots on Net. This follows Zeke and Carter. So Carter is a student at South Carolina University. He pretty much hates everything to do with university except hockey, which is his one true love. He absolutely loves hockey and is fully dedicated to hockey and hopes to one day play in the NHL, despite the fact that his parents don't want that for him. They would prefer he takes over the family business, but he's working very much towards eventually ending up in the NHL, and he meets Zeke, who is looking for a house. Zeke didn't grow up very wealthy. He actually grew up in a trailer park with his gran, but he's very bright, very smart, and he's now at university studying, and so he's looking for a house to rent close to campus. Carter's parents have actually bought a house for him, and it's obviously too big for just one guy, so he's actually looking to sublet one of the rooms in his house, and so that is how he comes to meet Zeke. Right off the bat, the thing about Carter is that he's written as very cold and aloof, but he's such a fundamentally kind person. That's one of my favorite things about him, is that he doesn't particularly project a kind image, and he has all these tattoos. So he's somebody that you could easily write to be callous and rude and stuck up, but he's actually not, despite the fact that he appears to be very grumpy. He's a very kind person, and he immediately clocked the financial differences between him and Zeke and actually gave him quite the steal in terms of renting the house so he could focus on school and everything, which is something that you wouldn't expect somebody who's portrayed the way he is to do. Honestly, there are parts of me that think he would have asked Zeke not to pay anything, but the thing is, you don't want to come across as patronizing in any way, and Zeke has far too much pride to not pay anybody anything for living in the house. So they come up with something that works for both of them. Zeke would cook for Carter, and it became a house that he no longer dreaded going back to and no longer felt alone in, because every time he came home, Zeke was there, and they would cook together, eat together, talk, and they became very friendly. And then through that, romantic feelings ensued. I just love seeing that transition from friends to lovers. It was so cute, and Carter was respectful from beginning. There's so many complicated layers. His relationship with his parents. Also, Zeke is somebody that would fall either on the demisexual, asexual spectrum. I haven't read the book in a while, so I'm not quite sure, but he's also the kind of person who needs to have a connection to somebody before they can have sexual attraction to them, and also he rarely ever experiences sexual attraction to people. So it was definitely an interesting part of the story. It was just such a cute, warm story, navigated with so much respect and patience and understanding. And even when they would mess up little things here and there, it wasn't dragged out, and nothing they ever did was ever unforgivable. And I think that's why so many people like it. It's such a solid start to the series, and if you like this book, it is a great gateway into reading all the rest. Funny enough, this is actually the first book of JJ Mulder that I read. I didn't actually start with the Offsides series. I started with this particular book, and it made me want to read every other thing that JJ Mulder has ever written, which says a lot. So even in its imperfection, it's still captivating enough to keep you hooked. The next book on the list is Save the Game. This follows Max and Luke. So Max also plays on the hockey team. He had very few cameos in Carter's book because he would hang around them sometimes. Zeke picked up on the fact that Max might be carrying a heavy burden, and actually, which was the sweetest thing, encouraged Carter to keep talking to him, to include him, to invite him over to the house. So at the end of book one, we knew that there was something going on with Max. Max experiences something that I believe no person should ever experience, and it is extremely traumatizing. The book starts when he is still coming to grips with it, and he is isolating himself. The only things that he has energy to focus on are his studies and hockey. He's extremely good at hockey. He's one of the strongest players on the team. So despite the behavioral changes that people are observing, they are desperate to keep him on the team because he is one of those people that you can tell is going to be the NHL based on how good he is. So he's just barely keeping afloat. So one day he goes into the diner because he's been hiding so much from people and isolating himself, and he just kind of wanted to experience a semblance of being normal. So he goes to the diner one day in the evening, so there wouldn't have been many people there because I don't think he could handle a diner in the day where it's busy and there's so many people and so many distractions. And then that's when he meets Luke. Luke plays for the baseball team, if I'm not mistaken, but he works part-time at the diner, and they meet. And Luke is such a gregarious bubbly person. He immediately notices how shy and uncomfortable Max is, but he still engages him in conversation, and he very gently, I suppose, brings him out of his shell. And that's kind of how their dynamic was over the course of the book. Whenever Max would try to pull away, Luke would be there reminding him that somebody cares about him, somebody's looking out for him, somebody wants him to be around, despite the fact that he may not necessarily feel like himself. And it was a very heartbreaking book because you get to see them navigate the relationship with the trauma, because even though Max didn't want Luke to find out about what happened to him, it was inevitable because of the precise thing that happened to him and the fact that he was navigating a romantic relationship simultaneously. They had to tackle it together. And I love the fact that they didn't shy away from the less glamorous effects of being in a relationship with somebody who has experienced these things and talking about hard topics and the role that you can play to support somebody who has been through something like this. It takes patience, it takes understanding, it takes talking, it takes professional help. And I think it was just so sweet to see just Max have that person. I also want to highlight Nico in this book. Nico was amazing. He was very helpful for Max because at some point Max goes to Nico for help. And he was just such a just lovely person to Max. I would say Nico and Max are quite similar people. Max being slightly sweeter and more gentle, and Nico being a little bit more gruff. But I think there is an understanding between them that didn't necessarily take a lot of words, because I do see the similarities between them. And it was great to see him just take on a very almost like parental role. Anthony also helped as well, because Anthony had some cameos in this book as well as book number 1, because he sometimes comes to help train the teams, and they love having him there because who doesn't want to have an NHL star train them. Anthony's very much involved with the team, and obviously because the team knows that him and Nico are in a relationship, they kind of see Anthony as an extension of Nico in a way. So it was good to see them be almost parental figures to Max when he was going through a really hard time. Also Carter as well. Anthony is very much Carter's number 1 fan, and that started all the way back in the last series when Anthony first met Nico and was helping him train the boys. He sees all the promise in the boys, and they all love him as a result because he helps bring them together as a team, and they all look up to him. So it was nice to see that play out here. I also loved seeing his friendship with Carter and how that helped also Marcos, his best friend, who we'll talk about a little bit later. He has one of the most incredible best friends I've ever read about in any story ever. One of the things that the book explores is how your friendship could change, especially when there's an additional layer of guilt after trauma. I just love the fact that it didn't shy away from the less glamorous aspects of how it changes everybody's life that is connected to the person who has experienced a trauma. But at the same time, the overarching message of this book is that there is light at the end of the tunnel. The one thing I don't like about this book is the way in which Luke finds out about what happens to Max is very careless, and I hated it because it's truly such a violation of privacy, and it didn't really get resolved. But other than that, I absolutely love this book. The next book is On the Edge, Vas and Atlas. Vas actually plays for the hockey team with both Carter and Max, and they are very good friends. They have this little friend group with Zeke and Luke, and they all hang out together, and it's really beautiful. And I love to see the way that they all depend on each other and love each other so much. Their get-togethers are honestly almost as exciting as the romantic story unfolding, because the friendship between the guys is so beautiful. And then we have Atlas, who also goes to the university but isn't particularly connected to sports. The reason why him and Vas meet is that they share a class together, and I think they're paired to work on a group project. And Vas is actually German, so he's moved over to go to university. One thing I love about him is that you can tell he's a foreign student just from the way he talks and the way he formulates certain things about himself. Somebody can tell you that a certain character is foreign, but there's nothing that indicates that they're foreign besides them telling you that they're foreign. Whereas with Vas, it was in the way that he would formulate his words, in the way he was constantly worrying about whether or not he was portraying himself well in English. That worry about translating, because obviously he thinks in German, and if he was speaking his language, this is not something that he would have to worry about. His book was something I was curious about because from the previous books, I had also fallen in love with him. He's such a kind soul, and he's so sweet, and he's the kind of person that in a group would go greeting everybody and making sure they're okay and encouraging people. I would definitely say he has people-pleasing tendencies. He's the kind of person that if somebody doesn't like him, he's a bit uncomfortable. Not in an egotistical way, but almost like he doesn't want to deal with people not liking him because he's in a new place, and things are always easier when people like you. Mistakes are always easier forgiven when people like you. So I think it probably comes from a place of wanting to feel secure. And so he meets Atlas, and Atlas is not having any of it. Atlas is described as a stray alley cat. He doesn't want to be around Vas, but then he finds himself obviously being charmed by Vas, but always trying desperately to keep it under wraps because he doesn't want Vas to know that he likes him or likes anything. And so the story focuses on them just going through all of that and eventually just breaking down each other's barriers and trusting each other and forming that bond. One of the things I really loved about this story is that Vas is actually on the asexual spectrum, and I think at some point he has a really nice conversation with Zeke about the ways in which they are similar. And it's also not a problem with Atlas. Atlas is not on the asexual spectrum, but he is very understanding of Vas. He never pressures Vas to do anything. The thing about Atlas that I really liked is that despite him being so prickly, Vas being asexual was something that he was told, he understood, and was willing to put up with, in the sense that he's not trying to change Vas. He knows exactly who he's with, and he's decided, you know what, this works for me. I may not be on the spectrum, but it works for me, and I will never question that or pressure him. And one thing Vas will do is sometimes he will apologize for not wanting to have sex, because he does have sex sometimes. But then Atlas will be like, stop apologizing. Don't ever apologize for who you are. And he was very just upfront and frank about that. And it was very cool. I would have loved to see more discussion about what that means for a couple in a sort of mixed sex relationship. It would have been so interesting to delve further into that and what that dynamic kind of looks like. Because I feel like we could have done with a bit more discussion about it. I loved how their relationship came together. I read it in a day. And I was very proud of myself for that because I just couldn't get enough. Atlas has a very complicated background himself. It's the reason why he's so standoffish and unwilling to welcome love into his life, because he has a very difficult family life. But eventually they do find their footing, and it's the most beautiful thing. The next book is One Touch Pass. It features Nate and Marcus. So Nate is actually one of Atlas's roommates. So he does have a few cameos in the third book. And again, he was very funny. So I was very intrigued by him. J.J. Mulder has a way of sprinkling her future characters in and making you intrigued by them. And Marcus, who's Max's best friend. So as I said, the very traumatic thing that happened to Max is that it happened at a party. Him and Max have been joined at the hip for years. They are childhood best friends and they went to the same university. They share a house, so they're very close. And this thing happens to his best friend that he has a lot of guilt over, but the guilt eats away at him every day. He is paranoid. He's constantly checking Max's location to see if he's where he said he was going to be, if he was safe. Basically, he is looking after Max at the expense of himself. So he's full on neglecting himself because he feels so much guilt for having not prevented something that was not his to prevent, and he was not in a position to prevent. And they're still wading through the awkwardness of it all. They're sort of stepping on each other's toes because Max is in a place now where he's getting better. He's in therapy. He has this new partner, and he's like, it's okay for you to let go. It's okay for you to focus on yourself. I'm aware that this affected us both, albeit in different ways, but you need to take time for yourself. And it's not really until Nate comes into Marcus's life that he starts to really think about himself, because Nate makes him think about himself. They meet at a party and they have a little bit of a moment. It's very instant love on Nate's part because he's so into Marcus and he wants Marcus at all costs. And Marcus is like, you can have anyone you want, and you want me, you don't deserve me. And Nate is like, see, I get that you're not ready for a relationship, which is fine. As long as I'm in a relationship with you, I don't really care. And it's such a funny dynamic. But Nate is also, again, very similar to Luke in the fact that they're very bubbly and gregarious and loving, and they have so much love to give, and they give it in the loudest and proudest ways. Whereas I think with Max and Marcos, they're a bit quieter. They also have so much love to give, but they're a bit more subtle with it. And I think it's a good balance, with that gregarious, upbeat energy being balanced by something a bit quieter and more grounded. It wasn't one of my favorites because I feel like they spent quite a lot of time apart, even though I understand why they did because of the reluctance, especially on Marcus's end. But I just wish that they had more time together and to just enjoy their relationship. But I don't really feel like they did, and that's where it felt lacking to me, and I got a little bit bored. Did I also mention all of these guys are connected to the hockey team? Nate plays on the hockey team as well. He's also preoccupied with hockey and he's also very good at it. But he's a country boy and he has like a farm with his uncles and he loves horses. And that was something that played a large role in their book, which I absolutely loved. So again, I just wish we had had more time of just Marcos and Nate navigating their relationship, especially in that secluded space. And I think it's part of the reason why the book kind of fell flat in the middle for me, is I just wanted more time with just both of them. The last book in the series is called The Last Buzzer, and that follows Jack and Desmond. So Jack plays on the hockey team as well, just like Carter and Max and Nate and Vass, and he's also Nate's best friend, so we meet him in book 4. And Desmond actually meets Jack because he becomes the assistant coach for South Carolina University's hockey team. So he becomes Nico's assistant. He has just recently moved back to the States because his sister and her husband have passed away, and he has now become the sole guardian of his nephew, and so he's navigating grief and loss, as well as now technically being a parent, but also dealing with the fact that his parents are homophobic twats, and they're doing everything in their power to take his nephew away, which is so frustrating and so annoying. The only reason why they're trying to take his nephew away from him is because he's gay. No other reason. The thing about Jack is Jack plays hockey, but he's not that interested in hockey. He more so likes reading. Hockey is just something he does in his spare time, but not something that he would have liked to progress further, if that makes any sense. He's not like Carter and not like Max, in the sense that he's not looking to progress to the NHL. He's just doing it because he's okay at it, and it's a great way to be around his best friend. I also love the fact that there was full transparency with Nico. Nico was very protective of Jack. When he was first told by Jack and Desmond that there was interest between them, that conflict of interest is something that he took very seriously, and he was like, I hope you're not taking advantage of him, so don't worry about that. It wasn't a secret. It was something that they were 100% honest with from the jump, and it's something that I thought was handled very well. Desmond and Jack are also both on the asexual spectrum, and so this is the one book of J.J. Mulder's that doesn't have any sex scenes at all, and I thought it was so good. And I also think it's great for people who maybe don't want to have sex scenes in their romance books, or a great counter to people who think that you cannot have a good romance book without sex, because you definitely can, and this book is proof of it. I loved how you could see them tackle forming this small family with Desmond and Jack and his little nephew, but also Desmond having to contend with real life and the fact that his nephew is grieving his parents, but also is kind of being manipulated by his grandparents to not like his uncle, even though he has no reason to not love or trust his uncle. And it was just such a cute, cozy story. The love and the acceptance in the story was just absolutely beautiful, and I enjoyed every single minute of it. It's one of my favorites in the series. J.J. Mulder's books just make me so happy. They tug at my heartstrings. She does depth very well, and it's a joy to see all her characters feel distinct and they feel like people you could meet every day. If I had to rank my favorite of the book, I would say number 1 is probably Max and Luke's story, So Save the Game. I just absolutely love that story, and I've read it multiple times. I would say number 2 would probably be The Last Buzzer, which is obviously Jack and Desmond's story. I absolutely loved it. Number 3 would probably be On the Edge, Vass and Atlas. It was really nicely done, and I enjoyed it. I would say number 4 is Shots on Net, so that's Zeke and Carter's story. It was so good. And then number 5 would probably be One Touch Pass, which is Marcos and Nate's story. I wanted to also highlight that if you're ever looking for what true male friendship looks like, I have never met an author that writes better male friendships than J.J. Mulder, both in this SCU Hockey series but also Offsides. The relationship between the men really stands out to me in a way that I have never seen it previously done before. They are so invested in each other. They're there for each other in every way that you hope a friend could be. Not only are they bonded by, hockey and various hobbies and going out and having fun, but they're also bonded quite emotionally as well. They show up for each other emotionally, and there is so much to be said about what ideal friendships look like for people. And I think if you've ever wanted to read a book or a series of books that show what real healthy masculinity looks like and how beautiful male friendships could be, I think you need to look no further than either of J.J. Mulder's series. I think the friendships in these stories are as precious as the relationships, and that's saying something, because usually in a book I can acknowledge that a good friendship exists, but it doesn't take up space in my brain the way that the friendships in these books do. And I think that is a testament to J.J. Mulder's writing. Just the most incredible friendships. The next series I want to talk about is the SCU Hockey series by Saxon James and Eden Finley, and there are 6 books in this series focusing on a group of college hockey players. So the first book in this story is called Power Plays and Straight A's, and this follows Foster and Zach. This is your classic nerd jock romance where Foster plays for the hockey team of the university. He's very good and is on the verge of being scouted for the NHL. And then you have Zach, who is more academically inclined, a little bit smaller. Zach is actually the best friend of Seth, who is Foster's twin brother. So they've known each other for a very long time. The conflicts in this book are mainly the fact that Seth is not particularly happy that Foster is getting involved with his best friend. He does learn to accept it. Zach has to come to a place where he's actually accepting that this is not a joke. Foster is actually into him. And it takes a while for Zach to kind of warm up to the idea of a relationship with Foster because they come from such different worlds. Zach didn't really come from a family that's outwardly supportive of the fact that he's gay, and also he has pretty much felt invisible for all of his life. And so to have this attention of who is essentially the most popular student in the university, it takes a while for him to adjust and understand that it's a real thing. I didn't expect to like it very much because especially these days I don't gravitate a lot towards the stereotypical jock, nerd stories, or even brother's best friend. I feel like those tropes in particular can be a bit tedious, but I really like this one. I love the fact that they felt distinct, because sometimes when you read a nerd-jock relationship, it almost seems like the jock is more important and that he is more special, and the nerd is almost made to take a back seat, whereas in this case, I think Zach had a very, very distinctive personality, and they weren't made to be less important than Foster's NHL ambitions. And I thought that was really sweet to see them equally just strive to get their own goals, whether it's Foster with the NHL and Zach with wanting to be in academia. I love the fact that there was that balance and they were equally important, because I think that's also what I struggle most in with a jock nerd kind of thing, where it almost feels like the jock is doing them a favor by wanting to date them, and it's kind of dehumanizing. So I love the fact that that dynamic didn't really exist in this book. The next book is Face-Offs and Cheap Shots. So this is with Jacobs and Beck. Jacobs and Beck play on the college's hockey team, much like Foster. Jacobs was very close to Foster, and Foster was the captain, and he finally got transferred to an actual NHL team, so he's left the college hockey team. And so Jacobs has been working so hard alongside him to eventually be the captain. But then you have Beck, who also wants it, but just solely for vanity purposes. He wants it because Jacobs wants it, and he wants it because he wants to feel important, not because he feels any sort of like responsibility to hockey. He just wants to one up Jacobs, essentially. So their team actually sets up a few challenges for them to do, and whoever wins is who gets the captain position. It's largely a very silly book, because imagine the kind of challenges that a group of silly hockey players come up with. Like, it's very fun. It's a completely easy read. It's fun to get through. It's very much jokes till they become serious, when a connection begins to form between them and they start opening up to each other and get to know each other in a bit more depth. But ultimately, I think it was a fun time. They come from completely different walks of life. Jacobs has a very supportive family, but ultimately they are not at the best place financially. Then Beck comes from a really rich family, but very disconnected. He has a real relationship with his little sister. So it was nice to see them all come together despite all that. The next book is Goal Lines and First Times, and this follows Seth and Cohen. So Cohen actually plays again on the same team as Beck and Jacobs, and previously Foster. But Cohen has the reputation of being like the dumb jock. People don't particularly take him seriously because he says a lot of stupid things. He does a lot of things that people say, like, are you sure you're not gay? One time I remember they were talking about kissing guys, and he was like, oh my god, isn't it completely normal to make out with your guy friend and not be gay? And everybody was like, no. You just described making out with your best friend and enjoying it. Like, I think you need to explore something there. He just automatically assumed he was straight. So this book starts with the premise of him trying to explore that side of him and to see if there's any truth to him possibly being into guys, which there is. And so he begins this online relationship with Seth, who is Foster's brother, who also goes to the college as well. And they form a really nice dynamic over the phone, and then it takes a while for them to meet in person, but then they eventually do, and they have to navigate that. Also, one thing that the book addresses is Seth's overbearing tendencies and over controlling tendencies, because he does something that basically brings that to the surface. And there were hints of that in the first book, Foster's book, but it really takes center stage where he does something that affects Cohen and they have to work through that. I think it's a solid book. It was a fun time and I really liked it. Next book is Line Mates and Study Dates, and this follows Asher and Cole. So Asher also plays on the hockey team, and he had a few cameos in the last book, but he was a bit more mysterious and a bit angry. So going into the book, I knew that he had some issues that he was potentially working through. And Cole is just a student at the college, but his dad is Asher's coach. And his dad always wanted him to play hockey, but he just wasn't into that. I think Cole, if I'm not mistaken, was studying to be a doctor, so he had gone that medicine route because that was his dream. His dream wasn't what his father wanted. I think he's navigating having chosen his dream rather than the hockey dream that his dad wanted for him. And then he meets Asher, and his dad basically asks him to help with Asher because Asher is struggling. As it turns out, Asher has just lost both his parents and is now in charge alongside his older brother to look after his 5 younger siblings, and it's a lot because he has to tackle hockey and being a full-time student as well as basically being his siblings' dad. And it's a lot for somebody that young to take on. It's unfortunate because as a young child, he had lost his mother, and now he had to transition from that to having a stepmother and his dad. Then they both die. So it's like another tragedy on top of all these things. And so he's just very angry at the world, understandably, and he doesn't really know how to channel that anger. And it's getting to him having all this responsibility at such a young age. And he loves his siblings, but he's at a point where he wants to start his life, and now he's been set back several steps and he's just learning to deal with it. And Asher really, really helps with that. I do remember really enjoying the story, and I especially loved the subplot of trying to better communicate with his older brother, who is also a guardian to these children, and talking about feelings and about suppressed emotions and how much you can acknowledge that something affects you even though it's technically the right thing to do. And then the last book in the series is Puck Drills and Quick Thrills, and this follows Asher's big brother West and Jasper, who is a professor at the college. Jasper teaches maths, and we met him because actually Asher asked for extra credit because he had missed like a deadline or failed a course, and he didn't want to because he hates hockey players. And that is based on the way that he was treated and severely bullied whilst in high school by the hockey players there. And so they meet because West, who is the assistant coach for the hockey team at the university, he comes to basically beg Jasper to give his brother some grace in terms of meeting his deadlines, but also acknowledging that this is a recently bereaved guy and just to give him space. They have this whole fake dating kind of situation where West agrees to go with Jasper to his high school reunion to basically show that he had made something of his life despite the fact that he was bullied by those people who would be attending. Also, West is actually a former NHL star, so he went into the big leagues and was very successful, but only quit because, again, his parents died and he had to basically be a parent to his 5 younger siblings, and it's not something he could have undertaken in conjunction with being an NHL player, so he left the NHL. So Jasper bringing his former NHL very famous boyfriend to his high school reunion where his former bullies who were part of the hockey team but didn't make it into the big leagues. It's kind of a flex to be like, you may have bullied me when I was at school, but guess what? I'm actually now dating your hero. So that was kind of the whole idea behind it, which I thought was really cute. One thing I really loved about this book is the discussion about how some things create scars in you, and it doesn't matter how handsome you become or how successful. Some scars stay with you, and just because you've changed on the outside doesn't mean that the inside has changed, and you kind of have to do a lot of work to get to a place where your insides now match your outsides. There was that subtle messaging, but also you could tell that Wes was struggling with being basically a dad to his siblings. There were so many conflicts in terms of him trying to do his best but feeling like he was failing. He was also burning out. He was not particularly in the best place with Asher because Asher had, in his rebellious streak, slept with West's best friend. So not only are they dealing with conflicts about them trying to manage their schedules alongside being father figures to their siblings, but there's also that you don't really sleep with your brother's best friend, especially you don't have any romantic feelings. You just slept with him to get back at your brother. So there was that. So I loved the sort of complex dynamics within the book. I love the fact that Wes acknowledged that he wants to be a guardian for his siblings. He wants to raise his siblings right, while also mourning the career that he could have had. Like, two things can be true at once. And it was just nice to see people acknowledge like a full spectrum of feelings in a book. It was very nicely done. I think number 1 would probably be book 5, Puck Drills and Quick Thrills, which was Jasper and Wes's story. I think number 2 would be Line Mates and Study Dates, which was Asha and Cole's story. I think number 3 would actually be book 1, so Power Plays and Straight A's, which was Zach and Foster's story. And then I would put number 4, Face Off and Cheap Shots, which is Beck and Jacobs. And then for last place, I would put book number 3, which was Goal Lines and First Times. I think it's a very solid series. Some books are stronger than others. Some books have more characters that I like, but ultimately I think it's a great starter series if you're interested in the genre as a whole. I don't think you can be in the genre and not read these books. They're very popular for a reason, and I really enjoyed them. The next series I would highly recommend is the Puckboys series by Aidan Finley and Saxon James. The first book in the series follows Ezra and Anton and his group of friends in the NHL. They actually have this beautiful thing called the Gay Collective. It's a collective group of guys who play for the NHL, who belong to the LGBTQ plus community. They all play for separate teams, but a few times a year they come together whenever they are in the same city, and they just have fun. It's a way for them to just relax, because a lot of them are not out, and a lot of them maybe don't have the safe spaces that they deserve. So when they are with these group of guys, they know that they can be trusted, they know that they can talk to one another, and they know that they're all there for each other. Was it Queer Collective or Gay Collective? I can't remember. Yeah, I think it was the Queer Collective. The first book focuses on Ezra. If you've actually read the previous series, Ezra is Wes' best friend. They were very close, especially when they both played in the NHL. They would occasionally sleep together, but their relationship really never progressed any further. Ezra is a massive playboy, as evidenced by the fact that he slept with Wes' younger brother. And he's a very big commitment phobe. He's also very out and proud, so everybody knows Ezra is gay, and he just wants to take advantage of fully being out and being able to sleep with whichever man he wants. So his book is called Egotistical Puckboy, and it's with him and Anton. Anton doesn't particularly disclose the fact that he's gay. He's very private. Anton is actually traded from the Philadelphia team to the Boston team where Ezra plays, and they don't really like each other very much. They're complete opposites. Anton, they start kind of like an enemies with benefits, because they weren't even friends. They just kind of started sleeping together because they each found each other attractive, and they were just like, what the hell? And then it eventually becomes romantic. This is probably my favorite book in the series, I would say. I loved that dynamic. I love the fact that Anton knows exactly who he's dating. He doesn't really try to change Ezra. He makes him understand that I need fidelity from you, but you can still be who you are. I know who you are. And they get to understand why Ezra is the way he is. The most important thing about this book that I really like is that they didn't really try to change each other that much. They kind of kept the things that made them them whilst adjusting for each other, and it was very sweet to see. I loved their relationship with the Queer Collective. It was nice to see them commune with people who are just like them and have that security and that safety of being with people that they could be fully themselves with. And it was beautiful. The next book in the series is Irresponsible Puckboy, and that follows Trip and Dex. So this book is probably one of the funniest in the series, and I say this because this series is generally very funny. Trip basically has been in love with Dex for a very long time, but you have never met a more, how would I even describe it? Like, I don't want to call him dumb, because dumb is such a mean word, but like, you have never met a more clueless person in your life. You would think that he would have noticed that his best friend was in love with him. Never. And they're so weirdly close that anybody in a relationship with them would definitely find it weird, because they're possessive of each other and they have little to no boundaries, I'm telling you. The only thing that they didn't have is the additional romantic context. And of course, one day Dex convinces Trip to get married to him for a silly reason that only Dex could come up with, and they do. And then from then they discover that they might actually have feelings and attraction towards each other. But this was, I think, probably one of the funniest books in the series, just because the dynamic lends itself to a lot of laughter, and I think it's definitely the book I would recommend if you're looking for a good time. All vibes, no logic. Definitely second one. Third book in the series is Shameless Puckboy, features Oscar and Lane. This is probably my least favorite book in the series. I couldn't stand Oscar, to be honest. I didn't even think Oscar was that bad when I first saw his other cameos in the other books. But Lane is the PR manager for the San Jose team, and Oscar is very good at what he does, but he is constantly in the news for doing the most reckless things, whether it's having sex in public and being filmed. Oscar has very strong exhibitionist tendencies, and it's a problem when you are in a hockey team and things need to look a certain way to the outside world. Basically, he's a threat to the team while also being one of the strongest people on the team. So they're desperate to keep him because keeping him means the chances of them winning are high, but also it's a risk keeping him because he's extremely reckless and does whatever the hell he wants. Basically, Lane is put in charge of keeping him on the straight and narrow, but has a very hard time doing it. I did DNF this book because I just couldn't deal with Oscar, and the reason why he was the way he was just didn't seem good enough for his actions, and I just thought he was just so ungrateful for the opportunity that he had to do what he did, knowing that there are so many people who would want the same thing. I just couldn't really stand him after a certain point, and I kind of DNF'd. The next book on the list is Foolish Puckboy, that follows Alex and Gabe. Gabe is a firefighter. Alex plays for the Seattle team. Actually, the reason he meets Gabe is because they were having a queer collective get-together, which can get very reckless very quickly. The leader of this queer collective is Ezra, who we know is a fun time, but not particularly a sensible time. So Gabe is called to the scene when they accidentally set off a fire, and he has to come and attend to it. And they meet and they're instantly attracted to each other. Alex is newly divorced, but also trying to explore a different side of himself that may potentially be into men, because he just got divorced from his childhood sweetheart. So this book is about him navigating all that with Gabe. This one was a fun time. It doesn't stand out to me in any particular way, but it was good. I think it was definitely an improvement on book 3. Nothing too special, but a nice time. Next on my list is Clueless Puckboy, and this follows Quinn and Vance. Quinn actually plays for the Buffalo team, and Vance is one of the trainers on the team. Quinn has injuries, but the thing is, he doesn't want to admit he has injuries because he has a massive crush on Vance. And when you have an injury as an athlete, you have to kind of get close and personal with your trainer, especially if you have physical therapy. But the problem is that Quinn knows that he has a huge crush on Vance, and he's trying to hide it, and there's no way to hide it when you're in that position because, you know, things happen. So it follows him being in denial, but eventually needing to get help in order to continue his career and having to face the fact that he actually likes Vance. Things happen and they make it work for them. It was fun, it was quick, but again, it doesn't have any lasting effects on me. I can barely remember the story, but again, it was a fun time and I liked it. The next is Bromantic Puckboy. This is actually, I think, one of my favorites. I don't know why, I just had a really good time. This one follows Bilson and Miles. So Bilson plays for the Nashville team. Who used to play for Seattle with Alex, but now he's moved to the Nashville team, I believe, and he meets Miles, who is a rookie. But the thing about Bilson, Cody, whatever you want to call him, is that he's been married like 4 times. And not only has he been married 4 times, but he's also been divorced 4 times. And I really like the story because he meets Miles and they instantly have this banter between them, very silly banter. And we come to find out that Bilson, he's not the kind of person that can sleep with somebody and not catch feelings for them. That is why he's been married as many times as he has, because he cannot keep his feelings in check. He admits it later, but he is a hopeless romantic and he wants that romantic connection to someone and he wants that long-lasting relationship. But the trouble with him is that once he sleeps with somebody, he kind of doesn't pay attention to compatibility and he just straight up marries them. And obviously you can't just be marrying people you're sleeping with, like it doesn't make any sense, and you're likely to run into trouble because of that when you don't take time to develop a relationship. So when he meets Miles, they're kind of trying to keep each other on the straight and narrow and in check, and a connection forms between them and they fall in love, and it's such a really good time. I really enjoyed this one, I think much more than a lot of the others. It was just very sweet and very nice, and again it was nice to see the queer collective all come together and help when they need to help and encourage them where they needed encouragement, and it was a good time. Next book is Forbidden Puckboy, and this follows Knox and Easton. In their world, everybody knows the Kiki brothers. I'm not going to attempt to pronounce their surname because it's very complicated and I don't think I'll get it right, but I'll call them the Kiki brothers. 3 brothers who all play hockey professionally in the NHL. Easton is the middle brother, and Knox is actually Easton's big brother's best friend, and they have been best friends since childhood. So Easton has always known Knox, and he has always had a crush on him. But there's this forbidden element because it's his brother's best friend, and he feels like a relationship with them is impossible. But there's also the additional layer of the fact that Easton's big brother Connor is massively controlling, but not in an evil way. Kind of like from a very young age, he was put in charge of his brothers to keep them on the straight and narrow, to make sure that they were doing all their hockey and they were good at it, and just to manage them because their parents sacrificed a lot to let them play hockey. So they would work a lot and leave Connor in charge. But this has not stopped in their adulthood. Connor is still trying to micromanage both his brothers, make sure that there are no scandals. And by doing so, he really limits how much life his brothers can live. And it's annoying. And so disasters ensue because, well, the person he wants happens to be his brother's best friend, and he knows his brother wouldn't be on board with it. And everybody knows in this equation. I didn't really enjoy the book only because I felt like I didn't know a lot about Knox. Like, I knew he was a referee, I knew he didn't make a lot of money, so he was kind of dependent on Connor to kind of make ends meet, which was very mutual. But I wish there was more development into their story. It was very heavy on Connor won't let me date his brother, rather than heavy on the progression of their relationship and the formulation of their relationship. I just wish that there was more time put into developing them as a couple rather than so much focus being on Connor. It was very disappointing over the course of the book because you end up finishing the book and realizing that you don't know very much about the couple and you don't really believe in the story because you didn't see the progression that was necessary. And then you know more about Connor than you do about them. It didn't feel like a romance, and that's kind of what a romance should feel like, if that makes any sense. Book 8 is Possessive Puckboy, which follows Connor and Parker. Parker is the new owner of the hockey team that Connor and Easton both play for, which is the Colorado team. He's actually just bought the team out of spite because he kind of wants to give Connor payback for contributing to his bullying as a child. He's just lost his father and he's grieving. So they have to navigate the fact that Connor is actually dealing with an identity crisis because now that he's come to the understanding that he is a pain in his brother's side, he needs to take a step back from being so controlling and so over involved in his brother's lives that they start to resent him. He's now having to deal with all that on top of really questioning who he is without hockey, because he realizes that he's played hockey all his life because his parents have asked him to. He's very much the first child in a very stereotypical way, in the sense that he's been living for other people rather than himself. And so he starts questioning, do I really love hockey? Why am I so controlling? Why was all this responsibility thrust on me from a very young age? Who am I if I'm not my brother's keeper? If I'm not interested in hockey? If I have to acknowledge the fact that I maybe not purposely but contributed to my now owner's bullying that he's still holding on to, that still affects him to this very day. And this book explores that. I really like this one, to be honest. I think it's definitely one of my favorites. Sometimes it did feel a bit rushed and unrealistic, but I like the fact that it dealt with real questions about essentially a parentified child and what it looks like when they have been cut loose from that role and now they have to figure out who they are outside of being the parentified child. It was really nice to read the story and how it unfolded. And then the next book in the series is Stubborn Puckboy. This is with Colby and Novi. So Novi is from Russia and Colby is one of the coaches for the Los Angeles team, and so he's recently been transferred there, and he meets Novi, who he used to play with. Essentially, Colby didn't end up being drafted because he wasn't really good enough to play in the NHL. Colby is actually out and proud, he's gay, and everybody has always assumed that Novi is homophobic because the understanding in Russia is that it's not really safe for him to come out as gay. In this book, he gets to a place where he's actually finally comfortable enough to say something because he's immigrated his family out of Russia, and I think they now live in Canada. He can finally come out and explain that not only was he a gay man, but also the reason why he'd been so standoffish about, being outwardly supportive is because of these reasons. The only thing this book suffers from is I really got bored in the middle. Once they finally got together, I just wasn't really interested, which is not something that typically happens to me. There's a 10th book coming out this year. It's called Charming Puckboy. I'm not really sure who it's about because I didn't read Novi's book to the end, but it's definitely one to look out for. If I had to rank the books, there are 9 currently existing books. My favorite book without a doubt is Egotistical Puckboy, Ezra and Anton's story. I love that one. I read it from beginning to end, no breaks in between. I love that dynamic. It's funny because I came out of West and Jasper's book not liking Ezra and absolutely adoring Ezra in his own book. I think the next is probably Romantic Puckboy, which is Bilson and Miles' story. That was really cute and sweet and I really enjoyed that one. Next, I would probably say maybe Irresponsible Puckboy, Trip and Dex. It was fun and it was good to see them finally find their feet after years of being in straight denial and being blind. I would say the fourth book on my list is probably Foolish Puckboy, Alex and Gabe. It was a good time. After that, I would probably say next would be Quinn and Vance, which is the Clueless Puckboy one. After that, I'd probably say Possessive Puckboy. I liked Conan Parker's story a bit more than I liked the next one, Forbidden Puckboy, between Easton and Knox. I just thought Connor's was better. The next on my list is probably Stubborn Puckboy, which is Kobe and Novi's story. And then I would say the lowest ranking is probably Shameless Puckboy, which is between Lane and Oscar. I just didn't really like Oscar that much. I just didn't enjoy it and I had to DNF. I would say the SCU Hockey series by Aidan Finley and Saxon James is better overall. I don't know which came first. I think it's probably the SCU Hockey, but I think that is generally a better series. But I think with Aidan Finley and Saxon James, I don't know if they're supposed to take themselves too seriously. I think they're supposed to be as unrealistic and as fun as they are. I think their niche is very much not too serious, especially the Puckboy series. I would compare it to McDonald's. Like, I know McDonald's is not particularly good for me and offers me no kind of like nutritional value, but I still love it sometimes. And I would say with these books, you know exactly what you're getting. There isn't too much depth. Sometimes there's like emotional stories, which sometimes when these emotional kind of subplots make their way into it, I always hope that they explore it, but they just don't. And overall, the kind of silly, ridiculous antics take over, which I guess, you know, if that's what they want to do, and these books are just highly entertaining, which I love. Like I said previously, I love the fact that the Queer Collective exists. I love the fact that there's a safe space for these men to meet, to be themselves, especially in a world that can at times feel very antagonistic towards men like them. It's lovely that they have this collective in which they meet and they can just be human beings first. And I think that is easily the most important aspect of these books, and the thing that I cherished the most about this series. The last series I have to recommend is actually the Scoring Chances series by Avon Gale. The first book in the series is called Breakaway, and it follows Lena and Jared. I didn't really feel that much of a connection between him and Jared, to be honest. I just feel like it was a bit of a shaky start, and if I had read this book first, I definitely wouldn't have picked up the others, because this one kind of left a bad taste in my mouth, and I didn't like how it was so awkwardly done, which I've talked about in other videos as well. So I DNF'd and I never finished it just because it just got too much for me. But thank God I didn't start with the first book, because some of the other books are much better. Book 2 is called Stable of the Game, and it follows Riley and Ethan. Riley comes from this ultra wealthy family. Ethan is originally from New York, and then he meets Riley when they become teammates. The thing about Ethan is like there's this sort of, you know, reckless energy to him. He rushes into things, but he's also so passionate. Riley is, you know, quite quiet and kind of restrained and very passionate about hockey, so he'll research about how to be, you know, the best goaltender. But Ethan is just like kind of winging hockey. He doesn't have a particularly strong love for hockey, but he does it because, you know, he's relatively good at it and he's on a team and he's, you know, earning money. So they meet and they connect, and I really love that dynamic. You know, they really do a lot for each other, being polar opposites, and it was a joy to see their relationship kind of develop. Ethan just has such an infectious personality, and I loved his love of his mum and his sisters, and I loved how it dealt into, you know, navigating difficult family dynamics, because even though he had this really strong relationship with his mum and his sisters, he still had, you know, fatherhood wounds. It also addresses, you know, Riley's relationship with his side of the family and how that impacts his life. The next book is Power Play. This actually follows Max and Misha. So Max has recently stopped playing professional hockey because he gets an injury that was accidentally caused by Misha, and obviously he doesn't hold any resentment because, you know, it was actually a freak accident. Even though it stopped him from playing, you know, something that he loved, he understands that it's a part of the game and it's a part of hockey. Sometimes you have accidents that prevent you from coming back. So he's very bubbly, very warm. He's a very beautiful person, Max. After Max leaves hockey, he then becomes an assistant coach, and the team he finds himself on has Misha as the head coach, and then they meet, you know, they form a connection. I think their book is definitely one of my favorites in the series. It was just lovely to see them navigate the injury, but also Misha was a bit more mysterious and quiet and a bit more serious, and it was lovely to get into his particular backstory, because his backstory, especially when he was in Russia and when he first came to the United States, broke my heart, to be honest. And there was a lot that he had to almost forgive himself for in order to have this life that he deserves so much. And it didn't take until probably Max knocking down his defenses, but also Isaac coming to live with them, who's one of the players on his team, that he had to come to terms with his past and how traumatic it was and how he can finally let go. Misha is kind of a person that's very grumpy but deeply loving. The emotional depth that was behind their story was truly one of the most beautiful stories I've ever read. And then the next book is actually Empty Net. Despite being the fourth book in this series, it was the first book I read. So it's between Isaac and Laurent. So Laurent comes from a rival hockey team, and his dad was a former hockey player, extremely abusive. And so Laurent is extremely aggressive, very insulting. He says homophobic things. But all of a sudden, he gets traded to the team Isaac is captain of, again, that Misha is also head coach of. And Isaac is very upset because he's like, Misha, why would you bring this homophobic, horrible person to our team? But the thing is, Laurent is extremely talented. Because he's on the team, Isaac takes time to get to know him, and he understands why he comes across as so hateful and does the things that he does. And he kind of understands from a psychological standpoint why Laurent is the way he is, and how it all stems back to the abuse that he faced at the hands of his dad. This is another very heartbreaking story, I'm not even gonna lie. Laurent is someone that you could hate upon first sight, but then you get to know more about him, and it makes you wonder how many people are brought up like this. Because nobody is really born with prejudice until you're taught to hate other entire groups of people. Especially when you're brought up to hate an entire group of people, but you actually are part of them, it's even worse. So I love the fact that it delved into the psychological aspects of having an abusive parent, and when that parent hates their child and hates everything that their child is. There were ways that his trauma would surface in physical ways, and they'd really devised ways in which he could cope and a relationship could be something worth it to both of them. There was also talk with therapy. There was so much talk about just abuse and physical manifestations of abuse, whether that is scars or repression or eating disorders. There was so much in this book, and I couldn't believe the difference between book 4 and book 1, because it's like night and day. The improvements between those books are so severe, and it was because of this book that I then went on to read the others, because I was just so in awe of how it was written and how the story unfolded and how absolutely heartbreaking it was, but how inspirational it was. Like, I'm thinking of somebody out there who has been through similar things. If they read this book and they were able to see themselves in Laurent or Isaac, or they come from difficult backgrounds and they think, maybe there is hope for me. Maybe I can be a better person. Maybe I can build the life I deserve. It's truly such a beautiful book. The last book in the series is called Coach's Challenge, and it follows Troy and Shane. So Troy is a coach on this team, and Shane is transferred to the team. I think my favorite aspect of this book was probably the team dynamics. It wasn't really the romance. The romance in and of itself was okay. I don't think it was anything special. I don't really remember it. It wasn't very memorable to me. So I mostly just liked the team dynamics. I love how they came together. Troy took this team over from Laurent's dad, and Laurent's dad, like I said before, was abusive. So not only did he abuse Laurent, but he also abused his team, because he ran such a tight ship, but like a tight ship to where they couldn't breathe, they couldn't mess up. It was not a friendly environment. And so with Troy taking over this team, they had to learn that you can have discipline, but it doesn't have to be rooted in hatred. It doesn't have to be rooted in violence or abuse. And so with the help of Shane and Troy, it felt like they were kind of healing the team, teaching them healthier dynamics, how to win without being necessarily bullied into winning, treating them with respect. And I think that was kind of my favorite thing about the book. The romance was okay, but I think at the heart of the book was definitely this new dynamic with a coach that led with firmness but essentially love. And I just love that for them, because they were a team that had been through a lot. I kind of wish Xavier had a book. Xavier was a character in the story that kind of piqued my interest, but Avon Gale hasn't added anything to this series in years, so I don't really think we're getting it, which kind of makes me sad. But so if I had to rank the books, I would definitely say my number 1 is Empty Net, which is Laurent and Isaac's story, followed very closely by Power Play, which is Misha and Max's story. I think sometimes they can be interchangeable. Sometimes Power Play is my favorite, sometimes Empty Net is my favorite. I absolutely loved Save of the Game, which comes in 3rd place. Again, there's not very much difference between how much I really love these books. All 3 of them, Save of the Game, Power Play, and Empty Net, were really good. They were the strongest, I would say, in the series, and they're in the middle, which is kind of strange. And then I would say number 4 is Coach's Challenge. I enjoyed it, but I'm also enjoyed it for the team dynamics and basically seeing the team nurse back to health rather than the romance in and of itself. And last place is Breakaway. I just didn't like Breakaway and I DNF'd. It just wasn't for me. It felt very haphazard and I just didn't really enjoy it. Speaking of Avon Gale's scoring chances series, one thing I really loved about this series and really stands out is the fact that not having had any prior knowledge about hockey or how it works, one of the things that I really loved is the fact that her story primarily featured people who played for the EHCL, because most of the stories I've read regarding hockey are always people in the NHL and they're always rich and famous. And I think I've never really read hockey stories focusing on people who loved the sport but ultimately weren't paid that much and had a much less luxurious lifestyle. So the love of the game was balanced with, kind of the discussions about financial instability or the fact that they earn regular salaries and their lives don't particularly match people in the higher leagues, which I think maybe is a discussion that maybe needs to be had. As somebody who doesn't really watch very many professional sports, I don't particularly know the intricacies, but I always thought it was so nice to see quote unquote regular guys playing hockey and not have it against the backdrop of being extremely rich and extremely famous, but also talking about the financial implications of what it means to play hockey full time but not have that huge financial backing of a typical hockey player who plays in the NHL, and what that looks like day to day, because it looks very different, even things from the kind of hotels that they stay at and the kind of experiences they have. So that was very interesting. If you stayed to the very end, thank you so much for watching this video. It was such a pleasure to do this video because I've wanted to do this for a long time, and now that there are, I feel like, a lot of new eyes on romance, but especially sports romance that have to do with hockey, I just thought I'd share what I'd read so far. I know that I haven't even begun to scratch the surface because there's so much more, and there are people who are actually veterans of this genre. They've read everything. You can ask them any questions you want. Definitely people with more knowledge than me, but I just wanted to share just in case you finish Heated Rivalry and you think, what next? What next can I watch? What next can I read? Maybe you're just getting into reading and you want to know what to read. I hope that this video is helpful for you. If you've read any of these books or any of these series, please let me know what you think about them. If you're a veteran in this space, let us know. Let me know what you did or didn't like about Heated Rivalry. I love to see all the love it's getting online. You kind of feel gratified in your love of it. But thank you so much for watching my videos. Thank you so much for the likes and the subscriptions and sharing it and just everything so far. I'm so grateful for this audience and we are growing slowly but surely. I would appreciate if you could like, comment and subscribe. Thank you so much for your support so far, and I will see you when I see you. Bye bye.